I'd been in that chair for 14 years, running the operational heartbeat for the client that practically paid for half the office. I knew their systems like I knew my own morning coffee order. 2 sugars, no cream, because cream slows you down. My team ran with precision, deadlines hit with clockwork accuracy, and the client never had to wonder if we'd deliver. If they sneezed, I was there with a tissue before they even knew they needed one. So imagine my surprise when the new VP strutted into his first department meeting, shiny cufflinks glinting, the kind of guy who'd probably rehearse smirks in the mirror. He didn't even shake my hand, just scanned the room like we were items in a clearance bin. Then, mid-sentence about operational synergies and cutting inefficiencies, corporate for I don't know how this works, but I'm going to change it anyway. He glanced at me and said, "Your contribution is average." In front of everyone. No lead up, no context. Just a verbal post-it note slapped on my forehead. Average, you ever had that moment where you feel your blood pressure spike, but your face stays as calm as if someone just asked you to pass the stapler? That was me. I smiled, small, polite, the kind of smile that makes people nervous if they're paying attention. He wasn't. He'd already moved on to talking about cost optimization, which I knew was his way of saying I'm about to break something that's not broken. Now, I'll be honest, most people listening to this, 97% of you aren't even subscribed. Yeah, I see the numbers, and I get it you're busy. But hitting that subscribe button, that's the kind of thing that keeps the coffee flowing and the team from losing their collective minds. So if you like seeing arrogant suits get what's coming, well, you know what to do. Anyway, back in that meeting, while he droned on, I was doing math in my head, not numbers, but steps. How many steps it would take before his streamlining sent the system into a ditch? How many before the client started asking questions? And how many before the board noticed? I didn't know exactly how it would play out, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to fight, and I sure as hell wasn't going to defend myself to a man who didn't know the difference between uptime and a coffee break. He wrapped the meeting by announcing some exciting upcoming changes to our processes, which sounded about as exciting as a root canal. Everyone clapped politely, because that's what you do when you don't want to get on the bad side of a VP. I clapped too, but mine was slow. Deliberate, just enough to make him glance at me like he was trying to decide if I was mocking him. When the meeting ended, I went back to my desk, opened the monitoring dashboard I'd built years ago, and watched the smooth, perfect green lines of our client's service metrics. He'd never even asked to see them, probably didn't know they existed. That's when I felt it, that tiny spark in the back of my mind. Not a plan, not yet, just a flicker. The thought that maybe, just maybe, if he wanted to call me average, I'd let him see what average looked like when he was the one driving the bus. The rest of the day, I went through my usual motions. Checked logs, sent updates, answered questions. But under it all, there was this quiet hum in my chest. The kind that tells you something's coming and you're not going to stop it, you're going to guide it. I'd been around too long to react out of anger. Patience was a better weapon. And patience, unlike him, knew exactly how the system worked. I didn't know it yet, but that single smirk from him was the first domino. And the thing about dominoes, they fall exactly the way you set them up. He wasted no time. Within a week of arriving, the VP had bulldozed through every established process, replacing them with something he called simplified workflows. In practice, it meant ripping out the safeguards that kept the client's systems humming and replacing them with half-baked shortcuts. Things we'd tested, rejected, and buried years ago were suddenly resurrected like bad sequels no one asked for. I sat through the first couple of rollout meetings, trying to point out the gaps. If you remove that step, I told him, you'll lose real-time error detection for the client's data feed. His reply was a dismissive chuckle. Your metrics obsession is charming, he said, but we're not in the business of staring at graphs all day. Let's focus on what matters, speed. Speed. That was his religion, and speed without stability was about to become his crucifix. 2 days later, my name vanished from the meeting invites. Oh, one of the project managers said awkwardly when I asked about it, he thought your time would be better spent on other tasks, which was corporate code for he doesn't want you in the room anymore. Fine by me. It gave me more time to do what I do best, watch, record, and wait. The first warning signs came quickly, tiny latency spikes in the data flow. Harmless on their own, but like hairline cracks in a dam, I knew they'd grow. I logged each one in my private folder, noting the exact time, the server involved, and the specific change that had been deployed in the hour before. When the pings started missing entirely, little gaps in communication between the client's system and ours, I logged those too. By the end of the week, my collection looked like a grim little diary. Thursday, 9:42 a.m. Data lag 14 seconds. Friday, 3:18 p.m. 2 missed pings, no follow-up from engineering. Sunday, 1:07 a.m. Latency spike 32 seconds. Error ignored. I didn't send alerts. I didn't raise my hand. I just documented. Every glitch was another brushstroke on the canvas I was quietly painting, one he'd be forced to look at eventually. The more the issues piled up, the more detached I felt. It was almost clinical. Watching him dismantle what had taken me over a decade to build was like a surgeon watching someone perform an appendectomy with gardening tools. I knew exactly what was going to happen, and exactly how long it would take for the damage to surface. In the background of all this, I started refining the tool I'd been using for years, my live dashboard. It was a simple interface, color-coded metrics showing uptime, response times, and error counts. Green meant healthy, yellow meant caution, red meant failure. The beauty of it, it updated in real time and it wasn't some hidden utility buried in a personal drive. It could live anywhere, be seen by anyone. I cleaned it up, made it idiot-proof. No technical jargon, no overwhelming detail, just the cold, undeniable facts of system performance. Anyone could look at it and know instantly if we were delivering or failing. Meanwhile, in the meetings I was no longer invited to, he was apparently taking victory laps about record deployment speeds and unblocking bottlenecks. From the hallway, I'd hear bursts of applause from people who didn't know yet that they were cheering for their own funeral procession. It's a strange feeling, knowing you're holding the one piece of evidence that will eventually dismantle someone's credibility. Stranger still, when you realize you don't even have to use it right away. All I had to do was make sure the dashboard was ready and wait for his efficiency to do the rest. And from the pattern I was seeing in my logs, I wouldn't have to wait long. The email came on a Tuesday morning, subject line, meeting request HR. No details, just a 30-minute slot dropped neatly into my calendar like a polite little guillotine appointment. 14 years in, and I knew exactly what that meant. I walked in to find the VP already sitting there beside the HR rep, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, looking like a man who'd just rehearsed for this moment in front of the mirror. The HR manager had that brittle smile you only see at funerals and terminations. "We're undergoing a departmental restructuring," she began, reading from what I assumed was page 1 of the HR breakup manual. "Your role, unfortunately, has been impacted. Want to thank you for your service, and assure you this decision is in no way a reflection of—" The VP cut her off. "Your contribution," he said, "has been average." He didn't just say it, he savored it, the way some people savor expensive wine. That same smug twist in his mouth from our first meeting, now upgraded to full theatrical delivery. I could have told him that our largest client's stability had been resting on my so-called average work for over a decade. I could have told him I'd been quietly logging the slow-motion car crash his changes were causing. I could have asked him how it felt to dismantle something without ever learning how it worked. Instead, I just nodded once. Understood. No protest, no defense, no hint of the fuse I'd just decided to light. He took my silence for defeat. That was fine. Silence is underrated. We wrapped up the formalities, final paycheck details, severance package, the obligatory reminder to return my badge and laptop. I shook hands with the HR rep, ignored his attempt at a parting nod, and walked back to my desk. My coworkers threw me those awkward glances reserved for people whose exit is sudden and suspicious. A few whispered "I'm so sorry" as I passed, and I smiled at each one, not because I was fine, but because they had no idea what I was about to leave behind. At my desk, I opened the shared company server. Every team had access to it. It was the common dumping ground for project files, templates, and resources. Nestled under the Operations Active Tools folder, I created one final entry, Live Metrics. The link pointed to my cleaned-up, real-time dashboard, the one tracking our largest client's system performance down to the second. No password, no fancy title, just a simple, tempting name and a front-row view of the damage. I didn't hide it, didn't password protect it, didn't even make it look covert. It sat there like a note left on a kitchen counter. Dinner's in the fridge. Only in this case, dinner was 24/7 evidence of his incompetence, updating itself in real time. As I clicked save and closed the folder, a strange calm settled in my chest. I wasn't angry anymore. This wasn't revenge in the Hollywood sense, no explosions, no big reveal. This was a seed. A seed I'd just planted in the middle of their house, one that would grow and grow until it blocked out all their light. I logged out for the last time, turned in my badge, and walked toward the elevator without looking back. The fuse was lit, the clock was ticking, and the best part? I didn't have to be there when it went off. The beauty of the Live Metrics dashboard was that it didn't need me anymore. It was like setting a camera in the woods and walking away. You didn't have to sit there to catch the fox stealing the chickens. You just came back to find the footage. Every latency spike, every missed ping, every service hiccup rolled in automatically, time-stamped and color-coded in a way even a half-asleep intern could understand. On day 1 after my exit, the dashboard was still a wall of green. Stable, normal. By day 3, a yellow blip appeared, just one. A 14-second lag. Harmless to anyone who didn't know better. But I knew better. By day 5, there were 3 yellow blips and 1 red. A full minute of downtime on a key reporting service. The kind of thing a client notices, even if they don't say anything right away. I later heard, through the grapevine, that the VP had seen the link in the shared folder and laughed it off as old legacy stuff I'd left behind. Probably why she was average, he'd said. Too much time staring at outdated charts instead of innovating. I almost wished I could have been there for that line, because it was the verbal equivalent of tossing a lit cigarette into a pile of dry leaves. While he ignored the tool, the client didn't ignore the problems. At first, it was subtle, An account manager mentioned they'd been asking about minor delays in data delivery. Then came a note about odd discrepancies in last week's report. Then, is there maintenance going on we should know about? In my mind, I could see it unfolding. The account managers, caught in the middle, forwarding the questions to the VP assuring them everything was fine, the issues continuing to pile up under the surface. A slow, steady drip. By the second week, the whispers inside the company were getting louder. Someone from support mentioned they'd had a spike in tickets from that client. The tone from the client was shifting too, still polite but clipped, professional in the way people get when they've stopped being friendly. Anyone who'd been in this business long enough knew what that meant. But the VP? He doubled down on speed, rolled out another update without testing, moved a batch process from night to midday to improve turnaround, but accidentally caused data to bottleneck for 3 hours straight. The dashboard caught it all, bright, unmissable streaks of red that painted the timeline like fresh blood on snow. I didn't check it constantly. I didn't need to. I'd glance at it maybe once a week, sipping my coffee, watching the pattern form. The green shrinking, the yellow spreading, the red starting to dominate. I felt no rush, no adrenaline. Just a quiet certainty that the system and his ego were on a collision course. It's a rare thing, being able to watch someone build their own gallows without realizing it. Rarer still when you've handed them the wood, the rope, and the instructions, and they still think they're building a throne. By the start of the third week, the smoke was thick enough that anyone with a nose could smell it, except the man holding the matches. Support tickets from our largest client had gone from an occasional trickle to a steady, pulsing backlog. The kind that makes customer service leads start running on caffeine and apologies. I caught word from an old coworker over lunch. She didn't give details, confidentiality and all, but her eyes did this little darting thing when I asked how things were going. We've had some challenges, she said carefully, which in corporate translation means the building's on fire, but we're still charging rent. Apparently, the VP's leadership style was to throw the problem at mid-level staff like a hot potato. His instructions, according to my source, were basically, keep the client happy. No root cause analysis, no diving into logs, no fixing the damn problem. Just smile, nod, and keep the big account from making too much noise while he pushed out his next efficiency update. One account manager, one of the good ones, started noticing a shift in tone during calls with the client's team. It's getting colder, she confided to a colleague. They're still polite, but it's that kind of polite you get from someone who's already talked to your competitor. That's the corporate death rattle right there. Once a client stops being warm, you're already losing them. I could picture the meetings, mid-levels scrambling to explain delays they didn't cause, engineers burning time chasing after problems they weren't allowed to fully diagnose, all while the VP played emperor from his corner office, certain his changes were just being implemented incorrectly. And through it all, the live metrics dashboard kept painting its slow, damning portrait. Red blocks lined up across the timeline like an infection spreading. Some of the outages were short, seconds or minutes, but frequent enough to erode trust. Others stretched into hours, during which the client's systems just sat there, stalled, waiting for data that wouldn't come. I didn't need to intervene. The beauty of this trap was that I wasn't pushing anything along, I was just letting physics do the work. Cause, meet effect. He'd cut corners, ignored safeguards, dismissed experience, and now the bill was coming due. The quiet thrill wasn't from revenge in the cinematic sense. There was no grand reveal yet, no confrontation. It was subtler than that. It was the knowledge that somewhere, in a glass-walled conference room, the first cracks were showing in his confident facade. That emails were being forwarded, conversations were being had without him, and the very people who once nodded along to his average comment were starting to doubt his competence. It's a beautiful thing, really, and the trap works exactly as designed, and all you have to do is sit back and watch the pressure build. By week 4, the gloves were off. The client's emails, once routed neatly through account managers, were now being sent directly to executives and CC'd to everyone with a title that might scare someone into action. The subject lines had shifted too. No more soft phrasing like quick question or minor concern. Now it was blunt, service disruption urgent. When executives get CC'd, it's no longer a conversation, it's a warning shot. You'd think that would have been enough to jolt the VP into an actual investigation. Instead, he doubled down on his brand of smug damage control. Thank you for your patience. One of his replies began, already a bad sign. We are aware of the isolated incidents and have resolutions in progress. Please rest assured your service levels will normalize shortly. The kind of canned, PR-flavored response that might as well read, we have no idea what's wrong, but we hope you stop emailing us before the board notices. He didn't even glance at the dashboard. I know this because it would have been impossible to look at it and still call the issues isolated. The one-screen timeline was now a bleeding artery of bright red markers, failures stacked so close together they blurred into solid blocks. Some represented short outages, others were long enough to trigger breach of contract clauses in our service-level agreements. And every single one of them was visible in real time to anyone who clicked that little live metrics link still sitting innocently in the shared directory. From where I sat, miles away, coffee in hand, it was almost boring. Not because I didn't care, but because the ending was already written. Watching him flail was like watching a slow-motion train wreck where the tracks have been missing for miles. The impact wasn't coming if, it was coming when. And yet he kept performing for the higher-ups, spinning his updates with that same oily confidence. We're tightening processes, streamlining handoffs, optimizing workflows. Corporate poetry for I'm rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Every time I peeked at the dashboard, it confirmed what I already knew: the damage wasn't slowing. If anything, it was accelerating. Systems were faltering under the weight of his improvements, cascading failures rippling out from the very changes he'd been so eager to push live. The only real question left was how long it would take for someone with real authority to stop taking his word for it and click that link. The calendar invite for the quarterly performance review went out company-wide, a polite reminder that the board would be gathering to assess key metrics: client health and operational efficiency. That last phrase made me smile. I already knew what operational efficiency looked like now: a dashboard bleeding red like someone had taken a chainsaw to the uptime chart. The largest client's account was on the agenda. Of course it was. There was no way they could pretend those escalating service issues were random hiccups anymore, not when the client had been escalating straight to the top brass for weeks. Through my own little back channel, I heard the VP had been working overtime on his presentation. Word was, he'd been telling anyone who'd listened that it was handled and under control, sprinkling in that self-satisfied smirk that had made him so easy to dislike. I could almost hear his voice in my head. The client just needs reassurance. It's about perception, not performance. Perception, sure, until someone clicks on a certain link in the shared folder. I pictured the scene in the boardroom. A long table, the usual lineup of sharp suits, laptops open, coffee steaming in expensive mugs. The VP standing at the front with his polished slide deck full of half-truths and cherry-picked numbers. Maybe he'd open with a joke, something to project confidence. Maybe he'd talk about positive trends in areas that didn't matter. But then, inevitably, someone would want to see the raw, unfiltered picture. And there it was, waiting for them, live metrics, a single click away. No spin, no buffer, just the cold reality of 17 straight days of compounded failure. That's what made this part so satisfying. I didn't have to be there. I didn't have to push anything. The trap wasn't about confrontation, it was about inevitability. The link sat like a silent witness, daring anyone to seek the truth. The anticipation wasn't nervous, not even close. It was the kind of stillness you feel when you're watching the last few grains of sand slip through an hourglass you flipped yourself. You don't rush it, you savor it. Because once the glass empties, the moment arrives and the fallout begins. He thought he was walking into that meeting to showcase his leadership. I knew he was walking into it carrying his own autopsy report. And the best part? He was the one who'd have to read it aloud. The meeting had been moving along in its usual, painfully polite rhythm: sales projections, budget adjustments, a few too many slides about synergy initiatives. Then the agenda landed on the item that mattered: client A contract renewal status. From what I later pieced together, the VP started strong. He talked about ongoing partnership, value-added services, and some vague nonsense about leveraging operational agility. He even tossed in a joke about how our uptime is our handshake. Cute, considering what was about to happen. The CEO, flipping through his packet, asked a simple question: what's the most current performance data for client A? The VP had numbers, he had numbers, but they were cherry-picked from the handful of hours the system hadn't been on fire. The CEO, not known for trusting selective reports, said, "Let's just look at the live feed." And then it happened. Someone, probably the CEO himself, clicked on the link sitting in the shared folder. Live metrics. The projector screen shifted from the VP's carefully designed blue and white slide deck to a wall of color that needed no explanation. Bright, unbroken streaks of red error bars, gaps where the system had gone dark entirely. Uptime percentages so low they might as well have been a dare for the client to sue. Every single day for the last 17 days was there in brutal, timestamp detail. Missed SLAs, cascading failures, latency spikes big enough to drive a semi through. The room went silent. Not the quiet of polite listening. This was the kind of silence that swells when everyone is realizing, at the exact same second, just how bad something is. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat, then thought better of speaking. The VP froze. There's no good way to spin a screen screaming in red, not when it's coming directly from the same systems the client has access to. He managed a week. This may be an anomaly, but the board didn't look convinced. You can't call 17 days an anomaly. That's not a blip, that's a trend. I wasn't in that room, but I can picture it perfectly. The CEO, leaning back in his chair, eyes fixed on the data. The board members trading glances over their laptops. The VP, trapped between the urge to defend himself and the dawning realization that defense was impossible. Somewhere, miles away, I probably poured myself another cup of coffee without knowing the exact timing of it all. But I'd like to think that at the moment the CEO's jaw tightened, I was taking that first slow sip, the warmth spreading through me the same way satisfaction was spreading through that boardroom. The trap had sprung, and it had done so flawlessly. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just kept his eyes on the wall of red for a few seconds longer, then turned, slowly, to face the VP. Is this, he said, each word deliberate, what our largest client has been seeing for the last 17 days? No one moved, no one even breathed too loudly. The question hung there like the final note of a song no one wanted to hear. The VP's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find the one sentence that could make the colors on the screen disappear. But there wasn't one. Not here. Not with every failure laid out in real time for the entire board to see. A few of the board members shifted in their seats, exchanging quick, loaded glances. Not the kind of look that says, "How do we fix this?" but the kind that says, "This man's career is already over. We just need to make it official." One of them tapped their pen against the table, eyes never leaving the VP. Another leaned in toward the CEO, murmuring something under their breath. The VP tried again. We've been addressing the 17 days," the CEO interrupted, still calm but with a steel edge that could cut glass. 17 days of failure rates at this level. And the client didn't come to us first, they came to the board. Do you have any idea what that means? Whatever color was left in the VP's face drained completely. He glanced at the screen again, as if maybe, if he looked hard enough, he'd find a way to point the blame elsewhere. But the data didn't lie. Worse, everyone in the room knew it was the same data the client had access to. There was no safe angle to spin from. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Heavy enough to make the VP's own breathing sound loud. Heavy enough for the rest of the board to realize that whatever came next, termination, demotion, or public scapegoating, would be swift. And somewhere, far from that room, I wasn't there to witness the implosion. I didn't have to be. My absence was louder than my presence could have been. The dashboard had spoken for me, and it had said in no uncertain terms that I was never average. The meeting would go on. Decisions would be made. Careers would end. But the image burned into their minds, the endless red stretching across 17 days, would linger long after the projector was turned off. And I knew, without ever stepping foot in that room, that the fallout had only just begun. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.